The first time Isabella Lauron said those words in my car, my world tilted sideways. I was driving her home because her husband, my boss, told me to. Alexander Lauron doesn't ask twice. He doesn't negotiate or explain. He simply states what needs to happen, and the universe bends accordingly. That Thursday night, Los Angeles heat still clung to everything like a second skin, even though darkness had fallen hours ago. My old Honda Accord's air conditioning wheezed pathetically, fighting a losing battle against the late September warmth. Isabella sat rigid in the passenger seat, unnaturally still except for the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers laced so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Then she turned toward me, and her voice came out barely above a whisper, fragile as glass. "Marcus, drive somewhere private." My grip on the steering wheel went white-knuckled. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with implications I didn't want to examine. "Private," I managed, my throat suddenly dry as desert sand. "Mrs. Lauron, I thought I was taking you to Bel Air." "Your husband said." "Please," she interrupted, and the desperation in that single word cut through every professional boundary I'd built. She stared through the windshield at the traffic ahead, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "Not that house. Not tonight. I can't walk through those doors right now." Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to refuse, to stay in my lane, to remember exactly who I was and who she was. "I'm nobody special, just Marcus Chen, a guy who sells luxury vehicles at Lauron Auto Group's flagship Beverly Hills location. I'm not a knight in shining armor. I'm not a therapist or a confidant. I'm definitely not the man who gets tangled up with his billionaire boss's wife. That's the kind of move that doesn't just end careers, it erases them." But the tremor in her voice, the way her breath caught on the words, the desperation she was trying so hard to contain. I couldn't pretend I didn't hear it. I couldn't pretend she was just Mrs. Lauron, the untouchable figure from corporate events. In that moment, she was just a woman who sounded like she was drowning. Let me back up. I'm Marcus Chen, 32 years old, living in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Pasadena that's functional but never quite feels like home. I work at the most prestigious luxury auto dealership in Southern California, the kind of place where we sell vehicles that cost more than most people's houses. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, custom Porsches, cars that are more investments than transportation. The job pays well enough that I can forget how lonely my life has become, how small my world has gotten since Sarah left. Sarah was an architect with big dreams and an even bigger impatience for anyone who wasn't chasing the same heights she was. We dated for 3 years. She wanted to move to New York to work for a starchitect firm, to live in a penthouse and host gallery openings. I wanted stability, routine, a life that didn't require constant ambition as fuel. She called me complacent. I called her exhausting. She left 2 years ago, and I've been going through the motions ever since. Work, home, sleep, repeat. No risks, no complications, no pain. Alexander Lauron owns the dealership empire, 7 locations across California, each one a cathedral to automotive excellence. He's 54, silver-haired, always impeccably dressed in suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He carries himself with the kind of calm authority that comes from never having been told no. When he speaks, people lean in and take notes. When he looks at you, you feel like he's reading a balance sheet of your worth, calculating whether you're an asset or a liability. His wife, Isabella, has always been an enigma wrapped in designer clothing. I'd seen her at corporate galas, charity auctions, holiday parties. Always at Alexander's side, but somehow never quite with him. She's 39, effortlessly elegant in the way that money and good genes can create. Dark hair usually swept into sophisticated styles, understated jewelry that whispered wealth rather than shouted it, posture so perfect it looked painful. But her eyes, I'd noticed them even in those brief encounters. Her eyes always seemed to be searching for something. An exit, maybe, or a window in a room with no doors. We'd never really talked beyond polite pleasantries. "Good evening, Marcus. The weather's lovely tonight. Thank you for your work on the Peterson account." That was the line. Boss's wife. Employee. Keep it clean, keep it professional, keep it distant. Then came that Thursday evening. The dealership had been busy. September was always strong for sales, people making moves before the year ended. I was finishing paperwork on a Range Rover deal when my phone buzzed.
Laurent.
My stomach tightened instinctively, the way it always did when I saw his name on my screen. Marcus, he said, his voice carrying that trademark calm that somehow made everything sound like a command. I need you to do something for me. Pick up Isabella from the Castellane Gallery on Melrose. I'm detained with investors from Singapore. Won't be free for another 3 hours. My first instinct was to suggest he send a car service, but you don't suggest alternatives to Alexander Laurent. Of course, Mr. Laurent. I'll head there now. Good man, he replied, then ended the call without another word. No please, no thank you, just the assumption of compliance. I locked up my office, grabbed my keys, and headed out into the LA evening. Traffic was its usual nightmare. Brake lights stretching to the horizon. The city moving like blood through clogged arteries. The Castellane Gallery was in West Hollywood, one of those minimalist white cube spaces where a single painting costs more than a house in most of America. I found Isabella standing alone in the main gallery space, positioned before a massive canvas depicting a stormy ocean. The painting was all dark blues and grays, violent brushstrokes suggesting chaos barely contained. She wore simple black pants and a cream silk blouse, no gala gown, no performance costume. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders. She looked smaller than I remembered, more human, almost fragile. Mrs. Laurent? I said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned, and something flickered across her face. Not surprise. She'd clearly been expecting someone. Relief, maybe, or resignation. Her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying or fighting not to. Marcus, she said, and there was a weight to how she said my name like it cost her something. Alexander sent you. Yes, ma'am. He asked me to drive you home. She stared at me for a long moment, then looked back at the painting. Of course he did. He sends someone for everything. The bitterness in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. We walked to my car in silence. The evening air was thick and warm, carrying the scent of jasmine from somewhere nearby. I opened the passenger door, a habit from years of customer service, and she slid in without comment. I walked around to the driver's side, my mind already mapping the route to Bel Air, calculating traffic patterns, anything to keep from thinking about the tension radiating off the woman beside me. The engine turned over with a reliable rumble. I pulled into traffic. The silence in the car felt different from the silence at the gallery. This was charged, uncomfortable, like something unspoken was taking up all the oxygen. Your home's about 25 minutes from here, I said, trying to sound casual and professional. Traffic shouldn't be too bad this time of night. Isabella didn't respond right away. Her hands twisted in her lap, fingers working against each other like they were trying to solve a problem. I could see her reflection in the passenger window. Eyes closed, jaw tight, breathing carefully controlled. Then she spoke, and her voice cracked on the words. Marcus, please don't take me there.
I glanced her, confused. Mom.
Somewhere with life, she said, louder now, more desperate. Music, strangers, conversations, anywhere but that house. Please. The way she said that house, not home, not our house, just that house. It struck something deep in my chest. This wasn't a whim or a detour. This was a woman who couldn't face walking through her own front door. I should have said no. I should have made some excuse about Mr. Laurent's instructions, about professional boundaries, about all the very good reasons why this was a terrible idea. Instead, I heard myself say, all right, I know a place. I changed lanes, heading away from Bel Air towards Silver Lake, and watched Isabella's shoulders drop slightly as the distance from her house grew. I changed lanes, heading away from Bel Air towards Silver Lake, and watched Isabella's shoulders drop slightly as the distance from her mansion grew. She didn't ask where we were going. She just stared out the window as the city transformed around us. From the manicured wealth of the West Side to the grittier, more authentic streets east of Hollywood. Vintage shops, taco stands, murals sprawling across brick walls. Real life happening in real time. The place I chose wasn't fancy. The Blue Note was a small jazz club tucked between a record store and a vintage clothing boutique, the kind of spot you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. A faded blue awning hung over the entrance, and warm light spilled from windows covered in posters for local musicians. I discovered it 6 months after Sarah left, during one of those nights when my apartment felt too empty and sitting alone felt like suffocation. I found parking half a block away. Isabella hadn't said a word during the drive, but when I killed the engine, she finally looked at me. "What is this place?" "Somewhere with life," I said, echoing her words. "Music and strangers. No one knows you here. No one's watching." Something shifted in her expression. Gratitude mixed with relief and something else I couldn't quite name. We walked to the entrance together, careful not to walk too close, maintaining that invisible buffer of propriety even as we crossed into impropriety. Inside, the Blue Note smelled like old wood and bourbon, worn leather and decades of cigarette smoke that no amount of California smoking bans could completely erase. The lighting was low and warm, Edison bulbs strung across exposed brick walls. A small stage occupied the far corner where a trio was set up, upright bass, piano, saxophone. They were playing something slow and melancholic, the kind of jazz that sounds like loneliness given melody. We found a corner booth, half hidden behind a support column. The worn leather seats had seen better decades, but they were comfortable in the way old things are, shaped by use, accepting of imperfection. Isabella slid in first, and I sat across from her. Close enough to talk, far enough to maintain the fiction that this was somehow still professional. A waitress appeared, mid-50s, silver streaks in her black hair, kind eyes that had seen everything twice. "What can I get you folks?" Isabella didn't hesitate. "Whiskey. Neat. Make it a double." The waitress's eyebrows rose slightly, but she didn't comment. She looked at me. "Just water," I said. "Still not sparkling." "Playing it safe, honey?" the waitress asked with a small smile. "Something like that," I replied. Someone at this table needed to maintain clarity, and Isabella clearly wasn't volunteering. When the waitress left, Isabella let out a long breath, like she'd been holding it since we left the gallery. She looked around the club, at the mismatched furniture, the faded posters, the people scattered in small groups talking and laughing. Nobody was dressed in designer labels. Nobody was performing wealth. It was just people being people. "This is perfect," she said quietly. "Thank you." "You're welcome, Mrs. Laurent." "Isabella," she corrected, her voice firm. "Please, just Isabella." The drinks arrived. Isabella wrapped both hands around the whiskey glass like it was the only solid thing in her universe. She stared into the amber liquid for a long moment, then took a sip. Not a delicate sip, a real drink, the kind meant to burn and numb. "I used to paint," she said suddenly, her eyes still on her glass. "Watercolors, mostly. Landscapes, abstracts, sometimes portraits. I had a studio in my apartment in San Francisco before I met Alexander. Nothing fancy, just a converted sunroom with good light and drop cloths everywhere. I'd paint for hours and lose track of time." I leaned back slightly, giving her space to speak. "What happened to it?" Her smile was bitter, sharp-edged. "I married a billionaire. That's what happened." She took another drink. "Alexander said the art supplies cluttered the house. He said the smell of turpentine gave him headaches. He suggested I find other hobbies, something more appropriate for someone in my position. Charity committees, gallery boards where I looked at other people's art instead of making my own. Lunch with other wives who also gave up their passions to become accessories." The words came faster now, like a dam had cracked. "So I stopped. I stopped painting. I stopped having opinions about anything that mattered. I learned to smile at the right moments, wear the right designers, say the right things at dinner parties. I became exactly what he needed, beautiful, sophisticated, invisible." "You're not invisible," I said before I could stop myself. Her eyes snapped to mine, sharp and searching. "Aren't I? When was the last time Alexander asked what I thought about anything important? When was the last time he asked what I wanted, what I dreamed about, what scared me?" She laughed. but there was no humor in it. He asks what I'm wearing to events. He asks if I've confirmed with the caterer. He asks if I've taken my vitamins. He manages me like I'm another asset in his portfolio. The saxophone on stage shifted into a solo, the notes climbing and falling like questions without answers. I didn't know what to say. Isabella Laurent. Isabella, just Isabella, was dismantling herself in front of me, unpacking years of silent suffering, and I was just a car salesman who'd made the mistake of caring. Why are you telling me this? I asked carefully. Why tonight? Why me? Isabella set down her glass and leaned forward slightly. The dim lighting caught her face, highlighting the exhaustion around her eyes, the tension in her jaw. Because you listen without wanting something from me, she said. Because when you look at me, you see a person, not a possession or a status symbol. Because I've been drowning for so long that I forgot what breathing felt like, and tonight I needed to remember. My throat tightened. I recognized that drowning feeling. I'd felt it after Sarah left, that suffocating sense that your life was happening to you rather than being lived by you. I understand, I said quietly. More than you might think. Isabella's expression softened. Tell me. So I did. I told her about Sarah, about the 3 years we spent together pulling in opposite directions, about how she wanted height and I wanted ground, how she needed constant motion and I craved stability, about the night she packed her bags and told me I was comfortable with mediocrity, like it was the worst thing a person could be, about the 2 years since, going through motions, selling cars, going home, sleeping, repeating, safe and small and slowly disappearing into routine. You're lonely, Isabella said. It wasn't a question.
I'm careful, he corrected.
Lonely is what happens when you're careful for too long. She reached across the table then, not touching me, but close. Her hand rested palm up on the scarred wood between us, an offering. I need to tell you something else, she said, her voice dropping lower. But not here, not with these people around, even if they don't know who I am. I need somewhere quieter. My pulse quickened. Warning bells rang in my head, loud and insistent. Isabella, your car, she said. Just park somewhere. 5 minutes. That's all I need. I should have refused. I should have paid the tab, driven her straight to Bel Air, and reported to Alexander that his wife had been delivered safely. I should have protected my job, my routine, my carefully constructed walls. Instead, I signaled the waitress, paid cash, and led Isabella back out into the warm Los Angeles night. We got into my Honda. I drove without thinking, muscle memory taking over while my mind raced through consequences and complications. I ended up at Griffith Park, taking the winding road up to one of the overlooks. Below us, Los Angeles sprawled in every direction. A vast ocean of lights, millions of people living millions of lives, all of us searching for something we couldn't name. I parked and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt enormous, pressing against the windows like it wanted inside. Isabella stared out at the city, her face half illuminated by distant lights. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, like she'd been rehearsing these words for years. He's not cruel, she said. That's what makes it so hard to explain. Alexander doesn't yell. He doesn't throw things or make threats. He just decides. Everything. What I wear to events, he has his assistant send me options. Who I see. He suggests it might be better if I didn't spend so much time with certain friends who he considers negative influences. How I spend my days. He built me a home gym so I wouldn't need to leave the house. He's building an empire, and I'm just part of the architecture. Beautiful. Functional. Owned. My hands gripped the steering wheel even though we weren't moving. Isabella, why are you telling me this? What do you want me to do? She turned to look at me finally, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I don't want you to do anything. I just needed someone to hear me, to see me, to confirm that I'm not crazy for feeling like I'm disappearing. You're not crazy, I said, the words coming out rougher than I intended. You're trapped. Yes, she whispered. Yes, that's exactly it. Then her phone lit up on her lap, vibrating insistently. Alexander. Even from where I sat, I could see his name on the screen. Isabella stared at it like it was a summons from a judge, then hit the silence button. "He's checking his inventory," she said, her voice flat and bitter, "making sure his investment is secure." The phone buzzed again. A text this time. Then another. Isabella didn't look at them. "What happens if I take you home right now?" I asked. "Right this second. What happens when you walk through that door?" Isabella closed her eyes. "He'll be in his study, tablet in hand, reviewing acquisition reports or market data. He'll look up when I enter. He'll say, 'There you are. Good evening.' Not because he cares about my answer, but because it's the script. I'll say, 'Good evening, yes, I'm well.' He'll nod and return to his screen. I'll go upstairs to my bedroom, my separate bedroom in the East Wing, and I'll lie awake wondering when I stopped being a person and became a thing." The casual mention of separate bedrooms shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. From the outside, the Lawrence looked like a power couple, polished, successful, perfectly matched. From the inside, they were strangers sharing an address. "How long?" I asked. "How long has it been like this?" "Always," Isabella said. "From the beginning. I just didn't see it at first. Or maybe I didn't want to see it." Isabella's phone buzzed again, insistent as a heartbeat. She finally glanced down at the screen, reading the messages without opening them. Her jaw tightened with each new notification. "He wants to know where I am," she said flatly. "He's asking if I'm safe. Not because he's worried about me, because he's worried about appearances. What if someone saw me alone? What if there are photos? What if his carefully constructed image has a crack?" I watched her face in the dim light, seeing something shift from resignation to something harder. Anger, maybe, or the beginning of clarity. "I need to tell you something," she said, turning fully toward me. "Something I haven't said out loud to anyone." I waited, giving her space to find the words. "3 months ago, I went to see a divorce attorney," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the weight of the confession. "Catherine Reeves, one of the best in Los Angeles." I sat in her office with its view of Century City and I told her everything. The control, the isolation, the way I'd disappeared into his life. She listened, took notes, asked questions. "What did she say?" I asked. Isabella's laugh was hollow. She said I had grounds. She said California is a community property state, that I could walk away with substantial assets. Then she asked if I was prepared for what Alexander would do. She paused, her fingers twisting together. She'd handled cases against powerful men before. She said they don't fight fair. They use investigators, leverage, public relations firms. They make you look unstable, unfaithful, mentally unwell. They bury you in motions and delays until you're too exhausted to fight. "Did you hire her?" I asked. "No," Isabella whispered. I walked out of that office and went home and pretended the meeting never happened. Because I was scared. Because leaving felt impossible. Because I'd already lost so much of myself that I didn't know if there was enough left to rebuild. The saxophone from the distant club seemed to echo up to where we sat, mournful and persistent. I understood fear. I'd been living with it for 2 years, the fear of wanting anything enough to risk losing it. But tonight, Isabella continued, sitting in that gallery, staring at that painting of the storm, something broke, or maybe something finally healed enough to break. I realized I can't do this anymore. I can't be Mrs. Alexander Loron, the perfect accessory. I'd rather be nobody than be his nothing. She looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "That's why I asked you to drive somewhere private. Not because I wanted to seduce you or drag you into some scandal. Because I needed to say these things out loud to someone who would listen without judgment. Someone who wouldn't immediately calculate the cost or the optics or the strategy." "I hear you," I said quietly. "And for what it's worth, you're not nobody. You never were." Isabella's eyes glistened. "You barely know me." "I know you well enough," I replied. "I know you gave up something you loved because someone told you it didn't fit their vision. I know you're sitting here in a stranger's car confessing your life instead of going home to a mansion because that mansion feels like a mausoleum. I know you're stronger than you think you are." She wiped at her eyes quickly, not wanting to let the tears fall. What do I do, Marcus? Tomorrow morning, what do I do? I thought about it carefully, knowing my answer mattered. You go home tonight. You walk through that door. But tomorrow you call Catherine.